Welcome back for another deep dive here on Beyond the Known. Today you've steered our ship toward the sands of time, specifically the Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt.
Yes, indeed. Our goal in this deep dive is to really unpack this foundational period, drawing from those fascinating historical lectures you shared. We're going to trace the arc from a unified Egypt through the establishment of their core traditions, right up to those breathtaking, monumental achievements that still capture our imagination.
You sent over a rich collection of material, and we've sifted through it to bring you what we think are the most compelling insights into the Old Kingdom. Prepared to discover the surprising story behind Egypt's name, how their burial rituals took shape, and the incredible beginnings of pyramid construction. Okay, let's get right into it. We're heading way back. And it all builds on that unification we talked about before with Narmer, doesn't it?
Indeed. If you recall our previous exploration of Narmer, we saw how his unification of Upper and Lower Egypt essentially forged the first nation. The Old Kingdom, our focus today, really represents the blossoming of that unification. A strong central authority allowed for an unprecedented level of societal organization and ambition.
And one of the key signs of a unified nation is a central hub, a capital city. Where did they decide to set up shop?
Precisely. A central location for administration and governance is vital. That's why Memphis was established in the north, about 15 miles south of what is now Cairo. This wasn't just a political decision, it held significant strategic value as well.
Strategic in what way? Were they already thinking about potential threats?
Interestingly, yes. At this early stage, large-scale land invasions from the east and west weren't the primary concern, thanks to the natural barriers of the vast deserts. However, there was a potential vulnerability from the sea, from groups across the Mediterranean. Locating the capital at Memphis provided a crucial early warning system and a point from which to coordinate any defense against seaborne incursions.
So Memphis was a linchpin for both political power and military security. And I remember hearing a fascinating tidbit that the very name Egypt has its roots in Memphis itself.
Yes, that's what's truly remarkable, that linguistic connection. The original name of Memphis was Hekapta, meaning House of Ptah, a very significant deity.
Hekapta.
When the Greeks later encountered this major urban center, Hekapta was one of the first names they adopted, which then evolved into Aegyptos and eventually into the Egypt we recognize today. So yes, the name of the entire nation traces back to the Old Kingdom's inaugural capital.
That's a detail you don't often hear. And it wasn't just a capital they established, but also the foundational traditions for the pharaohs themselves, correct?
Absolutely. The Old Kingdom was the crucible in which the fundamental traditions and behavior patterns for the pharaohs were established. These precedents would remarkably endure for, 3 millennia.
3,000 years.
These early rulers essentially defined the role of the Egyptian king, from their religious obligations to their administrative responsibilities, shaping the very essence of Egyptian kingship for the vast sweep of their history.
Now, these early kings of the first dynasty, it almost sounds like their existence was more in the realm of legend until relatively recent archaeological discoveries.
That's a very astute observation. Until the late 19th century, the early kings of the first dynasty were largely viewed as semi-mythical figures. While later historical accounts preserve some of their names, solid monumental evidence to definitively prove their existence was lacking.
But then the sands began to reveal their secrets. They started unearthing tombs.
Precisely. Excavations at Abydos, a city located in Upper Egypt, revealed the actual tombs of these early kings. Names like Aha, Den, and Zur, once seemingly relegated to legend, suddenly had tangible physical evidence connecting them to the land and to the dawn of Egyptian history.
And why Abydos? It seems quite a distance south from the newly established capital of Memphis.
Well, if we connect this to the prevailing beliefs of the time, Abydos held immense religious significance. It was believed to be the original burial place of Osiris, the god of the afterlife and resurrection.
The Osiris myth.
Right. The powerful myth of Osiris being dismembered and his body parts scattered and then reassembled and buried at Abydos made it a deeply sacred site, intrinsically linked with the concept of rebirth.
So in essence, these early kings wanted to be as close as possible to Osiris in death, hoping to share in his resurrection.
Exactly. The powerful allure of association with Osiris and the promise of resurrection were the driving forces behind these early kings choosing Abydos as their final resting place. They hoped that their proximity to the Lord of the Underworld would ensure a similar fate for themselves.
What did these initial royal burials look like? Were they the grand, ornate affairs we often associate with Egyptian royalty?
Not in these earliest stages, no. Compared to the later monumental pyramids and tombs, These royal burials at Abydos were relatively simple. They were essentially rectangular pits dug directly into the sand,
Just pits.
with mud bricks used to line the sides to prevent collapse. Within these rudimentary tombs, the pharaohs were interred along with various grave goods, personal possessions, and items believed to be necessary or enjoyable in the afterlife.
But I would imagine that anything of significant value was likely looted centuries ago.
Sadly, that is indeed the case. All of these early burials at Abydos were ransacked in antiquity. Despite this, their archaeological significance remains profound, providing us with invaluable insights into early Egyptian funerary practices and the material culture of the time.
And it was Sir Flinders Petrie who really brought these sites to light through his excavations, wasn't it? His name is quite prominent in the early days of Egyptology.
Yes, Sir Flinders Petrie was a truly pivotal figure in Egyptology, and he conducted extensive and groundbreaking excavations at Abydos in the late 19th century. You might recall that he was also instrumental in recognizing the importance of studying pottery styles.
Right, for dating.
As a crucial tool for dating different archaeological periods. His primary focus was on the knowledge to be gained, rather than solely on the pursuit of treasure.
I do remember that. And he had a rather innovative approach to compensating his workforce, didn't he?
Yes, what's fascinating about Petrie was his progressive excavation technique. Unlike many of his contemporaries who simply expected their workmen to surrender any discovered artifacts, Petrie implemented a system where he paid his excavators for each object they found.
Smart.
He understood that this would incentivize them to report even seemingly minor or insignificant items, rather than selling them illicitly on the antiquities market.
That sounds like a remarkably effective and, frankly, ethical approach for the time. And this system actually led to a rather remarkable discovery involving a mummified arm, didn't it?
It did indeed. On one occasion at Abydos, while Petrie was not directly overseeing the excavation at that particular moment, workmen within the tomb of King Zer unearthed a mummified human arm.
Just an arm.
Astonishingly, yes. And this arm was adorned with several exquisite gold bracelets. Because of Petrie's training and compensation system, this extraordinary find was brought to his attention intact.
King Zer's mummified arm, adorned with gold bracelets. That must have been an incredibly significant artifact to behold.
It was a truly remarkable discovery, providing a tangible link to one of Egypt's earliest rulers. One of the bracelets in particular was noteworthy. It featured serex, those rectangular depictions of the royal palace facade, a powerful symbol of kingship topped with small, meticulously crafted gold falcons representing the king's horse name. This was, at the time, the oldest piece of royal jewelry ever discovered.
That's just incredible. What became of it? I sincerely hope it's now carefully preserved in a museum.
Sadly, the subsequent history of this artifact has a rather unfortunate and somewhat unbelievable twist. The mummified arm and the gold bracelets were sent to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. However, the British curator overseeing the collection at the time, while duly impressed by the beauty and craftsmanship of the jewelry, apparently made the decision to discard the mummified arm itself.
No.
Yes, the oldest physical remains of a pharaoh were simply thrown away. Petrie later recounted this incident in his memoirs, expressing his profound disappointment and famously remarking, "Sometimes a museum is a dangerous place."
Oh, that's a truly disheartening story. What an irreplaceable loss for historical study. But these burials at Abydos did definitively confirm the existence of these early First Dynasty kings as real historical figures. Now, there was also mention of a peculiar practice of dual burials, one in the south at Abydos and another in the north at Saqqara.
Yes, this is a particularly interesting aspect of early Egyptian royal funerary practices, and remains a topic of scholarly debate. For these early First Dynasty kings, we do indeed find evidence of potential burial sites at two distinct locations. Abydos in the south, as we've discussed, and Saqqara in the north, which incidentally derives its name from Sokar, another prominent god associated with the realm of the dead.
So why the apparent duplication? Was one perhaps a backup plan, or did it serve a symbolic purpose?
The prevailing theory centers around the idea that one of these locations housed a cenotaph, essentially a symbolic or false tomb.
Oh, cenotaph, okay.
The thinking is that by establishing a funerary presence in both Upper and Lower Egypt, the pharaoh was visually asserting and reinforcing his dominion over the newly unified nation. It was a powerful statement of his authority extending across the entire land.
That makes perfect sense, a tangible way of proclaiming, "My rule encompasses both the north and the south, even in death." But which of these sites was considered the real burial location?
That's the enduring mystery. Historians and archaeologists continue to debate whether the actual physical interment took place at Abydos, with its strong religious ties to Osiris and resurrection, or at Saqqara, which would later evolve into the primary royal necropolis during the Old Kingdom. We simply lack definitive evidence to say with absolute certainty. This practice of dual burial, or at least symbolic representation in both regions, does appear to continue for some subsequent pharaohs as well.
Fascinating how even their final resting places held a political message. And following this formative first dynasty, we have the second dynasty, about which our sources tell us relatively little.
That's correct. The second dynasty spanned approximately 200 years, a significant period, roughly as long as the United States has existed as a nation, yet our knowledge of it remains remarkably limited. We have little more than a few names of the kings who reigned during this time. It truly underscores the vastness of the timescale we're exploring.
But then we arrive at the third dynasty, and this is when we see a real acceleration of innovation and ambition, right? The true beginning of Egypt's celebrated greatness.
Absolutely. The third dynasty marks a profound turning point in Egyptian history. It's the era when Egypt truly begins to assert its power and undertake monumental projects that would define its legacy. And this transformative period is largely associated with the reign of King Djoser.
And Djoser is, of course, primarily remembered for one groundbreaking achievement, the construction of the very first pyramid. But before we delve into that iconic structure, let's briefly trace how burial practices had evolved leading up to this point. We started with those simple pits in the sand.
Precisely. Initially, as we discussed at Abydos, burials were simple excavations in the sand. However, these were naturally vulnerable to the elements, to scavenging animals like jackals, which, drawn to the scent of decay, frequented burial sites and consequently became symbolically linked with funerary rites.
So there was a clear need for more secure and lasting forms of burial.
Exactly. The next evolutionary step was to excavate down to the bedrock and create burial shafts and chambers directly into the rock itself. These were then typically covered with stone slabs. This provided a more substantial and enduring form of burial. Eventually, the concept emerged of constructing a superstructure above these subterranean burials, initially rectangular enclosures built from mud bricks. These above-ground structures could even incorporate dedicated rooms for offerings to the deceased.
And these rectangular above-ground structures are what we know as mastabas.
Yes. Mastaba is the Arabic word for bench, aptly describing their characteristic rectangular shape with flat tops and sloping sides. The early pharaohs at Saqqara were indeed buried in mastaba tombs. These mastabas represent a crucial intermediate stage in the architectural evolution leading to the pyramids.
Okay, so we have this progression from a simple pit to a rock-cut tomb, then to a mastaba, and then this monumental leap to a pyramid. It seems like an almost unimaginable architectural jump. How did that transformation come about?
Well, the pharaoh who is unequivocally credited with initiating the pyramid era is King Djoser of the Third Dynasty. However, we also know the name of his brilliant royal architect, Imhotep, who undoubtedly deserves a significant share of the credit for this revolutionary design.
Imhotep, right.
Imhotep's name is known to us from inscriptions found on the bases of statues dating to the later New Kingdom, where he was already being revered for his wisdom and achievements in Djoser's time. While we don't have contemporary inscriptions explicitly naming him as the architect of the step pyramid, the later tradition is very strong. He was Djoser's trusted advisor and high official.
So Imhotep is considered the likely mastermind behind this first pyramid. What was his groundbreaking idea?
What's truly remarkable is that the initial concept wasn't a step pyramid at all. Djoser and Imhotep began by constructing a large rectangular mastaba, significantly larger than any that had come before, almost the size of a modern football field.
Wow.
Then, the idea evolved to make it even more distinctive by adding another, smaller mastaba directly on top, creating the first step. This process was repeated, with the base being enlarged and more mastabas of decreasing size being stacked one upon the other, ultimately resulting in a structure with 5 distinct levels, although it was later expanded to 6. This became the iconic step pyramid of Saqqara.
So it was essentially a series of progressively smaller mastabas stacked upon each other. That's a really helpful way to visualize its construction. But the lecture highlighted something truly astonishing about the step pyramid. What was that groundbreaking aspect?
What I find utterly astounding is that Djoser's step pyramid stands as the first known large-scale building in the history of the world to be constructed entirely out of stone.
The first one.
Yes. Just pause and consider that for a moment. You might expect a gradual progression, starting with smaller stone structures, allowing builders to learn and refine their techniques before attempting something so colossal. But no, the step pyramid emerges as this monumental first. At the time of its construction, it would have dwarfed any other building on the planet, a truly awe-inspiring testament to human ingenuity and ambition.
It must have been a sight that inspired both wonder and perhaps a bit of fear. And it wasn't just the pyramid standing alone, but a whole complex of structures surrounding it.
Correct. Djoser's step pyramid was conceived as the centerpiece of a sprawling funerary complex, encompassing various surrounding structures meticulously designed to serve the pharaoh's needs in the afterlife. One particularly intriguing feature was the serdab.
The serdab. What was its specific purpose within the complex?
The serdab was a small, enclosed stone chamber strategically located on the north side of the pyramid. Inside this dimly lit space, a life-size statue of Djoser was placed. Remarkably, the serdab had two small eye-level holes drilled through the wall, allowing the statue to symbolically gaze out into the eternal world beyond.
So the statue wasn't merely a representation, it had a very specific function within their beliefs about the afterlife.
Exactly. The serdab statue served as a crucial alternative vessel for the pharaoh's Ka, his life force or soul, in the event that his mummified body was somehow destroyed or damaged.
A backup plan.
The Ka would then have a physical representation to inhabit, ensuring the pharaoh's continued existence until resurrection.
That's a rather ingenious concept, a sort of spiritual backup plan to ensure immortality. And the complex also included other stone structures beyond the pyramid and the serdab.
Yes. Scattered throughout the extensive pyramid complex were various intricately designed stone chapels and other architectural elements. These were built for the specific purpose of conducting eternal religious ceremonies in Djoser's honor, ensuring his continued sustenance and well-being in the afterlife. The entire complex was designed to be a microcosm of the royal palace, a place where Djoser could continue to perform his royal duties in eternity.
It's fascinating how this early stone architecture still bore the imprint of older building techniques using more perishable materials like wood and reeds, isn't it?
Yes. What's truly insightful is observing how these pioneering stone builders, still in the early stages of mastering this new medium, often directly imitated forms and techniques they were intimately familiar with from working with wood, straw, and papyrus. For instance, they would meticulously carve stone doors that looked remarkably like wooden doors, but were, of course, completely immobile, purely symbolic and decorative.
Stone doors that don't open.
Exactly. Even the elegant fluted columns found within the complex were carved to resemble bundles of papyrus stalks tightly bound together, mirroring the construction methods used before stone became the primary building material.
So they were essentially translating their existing architectural vocabulary into stone, preserving familiar forms in this new permanent material. And Djoser also constructed something within this complex, specifically for a significant festival he would celebrate.
That's correct. Djoser incorporated a Hebsed courtyard within his expansive complex. The Hebsed festival was a vitally important rejuvenation ritual for pharaohs, typically celebrated after they had ruled for 30 years. It involved the pharaoh performing a series of symbolic acts intended to demonstrate his continued strength, vitality, and fitness to rule, such as ritual running, wrestling, and archery.
A fitness test for the pharaoh.
Sort of. There's even some compelling, though debated evidence suggesting that in much earlier periods, this ritual may have involved the symbolic or even actual killing of an aging pharaoh to make way for a younger, more vigorous successor.
Wow, that's a rather dramatic way to ensure a strong leader. So the Hebsed festival evolved into a more symbolic reaffirmation of power.
Precisely. The Hebsed transitioned into a ritualistic renewal of the pharaoh's powers and legitimacy rather than a literal replacement. Djoser, by meticulously constructing a Hebsed courtyard entirely in stone, created a permanent space where he could symbolically celebrate this crucial festival for all eternity in the afterlife, ensuring his perpetual renewal and divine authority.
It all comes back to ensuring immortality and a continuation of power, even beyond the earthly realm. Now, the architect behind this incredible step pyramid, Imhotep, his own tomb has become one of the legendary quests in Egyptology, hasn't it?
Oh, yes. The search for the final resting place of Imhotep is indeed one of the great enduring mysteries of Egyptology. Walter B. Emery, a prominent Egyptologist in the mid-20th century, was a strong proponent of the idea that Imhotep, as Djoser's extraordinarily influential architect and advisor, would likely have been granted the immense honor of being buried in close proximity to his pharaoh at Saqqara.
Makes sense.
Imhotep held a legendary status even in later Egyptian history, renowned not only as a brilliant architect, but also as a physician of remarkable skill, and he was eventually deified as a god of healing the Greek. The Greek god Asclepius is even believed to have roots in the Egyptian figure of Imhotep.
So Emery felt he was on the right track by focusing his search at the Saqqara. What led him to that particular conclusion?
Emery noted compelling archaeological evidence suggesting that Saqqara was a site of significant pilgrimage in ancient times. He unearthed numerous broken pottery vessels, which were a common indicator of pilgrim activity, as they would often bring offerings in ceramic containers. He theorized that these pilgrims were drawn to Saqqara seeking healing and blessings at the tomb of the deified Imhotep, much like modern-day pilgrimage sites. Additionally, the ibis bird held sacred significance associated with the god Thoth, the deity of wisdom and medicine, and later also linked with Imhotep.
And he found tangible evidence of these pilgrimages during his excavations.
Yes, Emery began excavating in an area he considered promising and discovered an extensive network of subterranean tunnels, so large they were almost subway-like in scale. These tunnels were filled with an astonishing number, literally millions of carefully mummified ibises.
Millions.
Millions! These were offerings brought by devout pilgrims to honor Imhotep. Emery felt he was on the cusp of a monumental discovery, meticulously following these ibis-filled tunnels for years, even encountering dangerous collapses that required extensive shoring up. He also uncovered inscriptions directly imploring Imhotep for healing, with instructions for the supplicants to offer an ibis to a designated priest on their behalf.
That sounds like an incredible, almost cinematic excavation. But ultimately, he never located the elusive tomb of Imhotep.
Tragically, despite years of dedicated and often perilous searching, Walter Emery passed away without ever definitively discovering the tomb of Imhotep. No subsequent large-scale excavations have specifically targeted the areas he was investigating, so the tantalizing possibility remains that the architect of the world's first monumental stone building is still waiting to be found beneath the sands of Saqqara.
What a captivating thought. The brilliant mind behind this architectural revolution, his own final resting place remaining an enigma. Now, we also heard about Djoser having a second burial located to the south of his remarkable pyramid.
Yes, situated just a couple of hundred yards to the south of the towering step pyramid is another significant structure known as the Southern Tomb, or Southern Burial. It's not a pyramid itself, but rather a subterranean mastaba-like structure. Inside, however, it's quite remarkable, adorned with thousands of beautifully preserved, vibrant green faience tiles.
Faience. We touched on that earlier, but could you elaborate a bit more on what exactly this material is?
Certainly. Faience is a distinctive self-glazing ceramic material that was a significant innovation in ancient Egypt. It's crafted from a paste primarily composed of ground quartz or quartzite. When this paste is fired in a kiln, any impurities present within the mixture rise to the surface and create a naturally glossy, glass-like glaze.
Self-glazing. Interesting.
By intentionally adding specific metallic impurities, such as compounds of copper, they could control the resulting color, producing the characteristic vibrant blues and greens we often see. Interestingly, the name faience later became associated with similar tin-glazed earthenware produced in the Italian town of Faenza during the Renaissance.
So these stunning green tiles within the southern tomb depicted scenes related to Djoser.
Exactly. These exquisite faience tiles in the southern tomb primarily depict Djoser participating in the Hebsed festival, the Royal Jubilee. This imagery effectively portrays him eternally celebrating his 30th year of rule and the subsequent ritualistic rejuvenation of his powers. This southern burial is now considered to be the earliest known example of a pyramid subsidiary burial, a secondary burial site associated with the main royal pyramid complex.
It's intriguing how, even with the advent of this groundbreaking pyramid architecture, they still retain some of the older burial traditions and symbolic elements. Now, Djoser initiated this incredible pyramid-building endeavor, but his immediate successor, Hudi, appears to have had a somewhat less successful attempt, didn't he?
That's a rather diplomatic way of putting it, yes. Djoser's successor, who the lecture refers to as Horus Sekhumkhet, though his name is more commonly accepted as Sekhumkhet, did indeed attempt to construct his own step pyramid, located nearby at Saqqara. However, his reign was relatively short, and he died before its completion. What's quite remarkable is that his unfinished pyramid was only rediscovered as recently as 1951. It only reached a modest height of a few meters before construction ceased.
So it wasn't exactly the grand monument he likely envisioned?
Not at all. However, this state of incompletion actually offers us invaluable insights into the construction techniques employed during this early pyramid age. Because it was never finished, we can clearly observe that the core stone walls were built in a somewhat rough and uneven state, and were clearly intended to be subsequently finished and smoothed with an outer casing of finer limestone on site.
Ah, So they didn't smooth everything at the quarry.
Apparently not always. This challenges the earlier assumption that all the blocks were meticulously shaped and dressed at the quarry before being transported and laid.
That's a great point. Sometimes the aborted projects can teach us more about the process than the finished masterpieces. And Huni's unfinished pyramid actually contained a sealed burial chamber, which must have generated considerable excitement for the archaeologists who discovered it.
Oh, it was a moment of tremendous anticipation. The excavators found that the burial chamber was indeed sealed with a massive stone block, immediately raising hopes of discovering a completely undisturbed royal burial. Perhaps another Tutankhamun-like find, albeit from the much earlier Third Dynasty. Within the corridor leading to the sealed chamber, they unearthed a collection of intriguing artifacts, including delicate gold bracelets, numerous gold beads, and a beautifully carved magical wand. Then, upon finally managing to access the sealed burial chamber, they discovered a magnificent alabaster sarcophagus, also securely sealed.
A sealed sarcophagus within a sealed chamber. The anticipation must have been almost unbearable. What did they find inside?
This is where the narrative takes a rather unexpected and anticlimactic turn. Despite the sealed chamber and the sealed sarcophagus, when the archaeologists finally managed the arduous task of lifting the heavy alabaster lid, the sarcophagus was completely empty.
Empty, after all that careful sealing and the promise of a royal burial. Why would a pharaoh go to such elaborate lengths and then not be interred there?
This has naturally led to a number of theories. One possibility, echoing the practices of Djoser and the earlier First Dynasty kings, is that this was intended to be another cenotaph, a purely symbolic burial. However, its elaborate nature seems somewhat disproportionate for a mere false tomb.
Right.
Another compelling theory is that it served as a decoy, intentionally designed to mislead potential tomb robbers. The thinking here is that Sekhemkhet, perhaps anticipating the eventual vulnerability of his pyramid, created this elaborate but ultimately empty burial chamber to divert attention from his actual and as yet undiscovered final resting place.
But the lecture raised an interesting point, suggesting that the very workers who constructed these tombs, often being the ones who later plundered them, might have been privy to the fact that the sarcophagus was empty.
That's a crucial consideration. The skilled laborers who built these intricate subterranean chambers often possessed intimate knowledge of their design and contents. They would have likely known whether the pharaoh's body was ever actually placed within the sarcophagus. If they were aware it was a decoy, they would have had little incentive to target it. The enduring mystery is that, despite this elaborate but empty tomb, we have yet to definitively locate the actual burial site of Sekhemkhet. If this was indeed a diversionary tactic, his true tomb remains remarkably well hidden.
So, a pharaoh who began an ambitious pyramid project that was never completed and whose intended burial place remains an enigma. What a captivating, if somewhat frustrating chapter in this early history. But the pyramid building tradition most certainly continued, and the next major pharaoh we encounter, Sneferu, is truly considered the master builder of this era, isn't he?
Absolutely. Sneferu of the Fourth Dynasty is a pivotal figure in the history of Egyptian monumental architecture. He is the pharaoh who ultimately achieved the construction of the first true smooth-sided pyramid, learning from the earlier partial successes and outright failures of his predecessors. The lecture aptly refers to these earlier attempts as pyramid-building disasters, highlighting the significant challenges and setbacks involved in this groundbreaking endeavor.
So there were indeed pyramids that experienced structural collapses or were ultimately abandoned. That's not something that always comes to mind when we think of these enduring monuments.
Yes, the initial stages of pyramid construction were far from a seamless progression. Sneferu essentially navigated these early engineering challenges, experiencing failures firsthand, and through these experiences, he progressively refined the architectural principles and construction techniques necessary to build stable and structurally sound, true pyramids. But his contributions extended beyond just revolutionary architecture. He also elevated Egypt to a significant position as an international power and established enduring artistic standards that would influence Egyptian art for centuries to come.
The lecture seemed to hold Sneferu in particularly high esteem, even suggesting he might be considered the greatest pharaoh. But it also included one slightly less flattering, though perhaps humanizing detail about his physical appearance.
The lecturer does express a clear admiration for Sneferu and his considerable achievements. While highlighting his remarkable accomplishments, there is a passing mention that in some of his depictions, he appears to have a somewhat receding chin, leading to the lecturer's personal and perhaps slightly tongue-in-cheek observation of a nerdy appearance. However, this lighthearted comment in no way diminishes the profound impact of his reign.
Right. And there is a significant monument to Sneferu, a stela, prominently displayed in the garden just outside the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, an important artifact that often goes unnoticed by tourists eager to explore the museum's interior.
That's right, a key piece. And he was also the first pharaoh for whom the use of the cartouche, that oval enclosure around the royal name, became a consistent practice.
That's an excellent point. Sneferu is indeed the first pharaoh for whom we find a clear and consistent use of his royal name inscribed within a cartouche, that distinctive oval symbol that represents the pharaoh's cosmic dominion and, in a sense, acts as a magical protective boundary around his identity. This signifies a growing standardization and certainty in royal iconography and the projection of pharaonic power.
So this pharaoh with the potentially receding chin was a major innovator in more ways than one. And he didn't just oversee the construction of one pyramid, but several, including this pivotal first true pyramid.
Exactly. Sneferu was an incredibly prolific builder, driven by an apparent desire to perfect the pyramid form. His first attempt at achieving a true pyramid is known as the Meidum Pyramid, located in the town of Meidum. However, when you observe its current state, you immediately notice it doesn't quite conform to the classic pyramid shape. It has a rather unusual tower-like appearance, rising abruptly from a large mound of sand and rubble at its base, almost as if a significant portion of its outer layers has collapsed.
So his initial foray into true pyramid construction wasn't entirely successful. What went wrong at Meidum?
Sneferu actually began the Meidum Pyramid as an 8-stepped pyramid, clearly following in the architectural footsteps of Djoser and Sekemket. But then, in a radical departure, he decided to attempt to transform it into a true pyramid by filling in these steps with smooth, white limestone casing stones to create continuous sloping sides.
Ambitious.
Very. However, it appears that this ambitious design wasn't structurally sound. Archaeological evidence strongly suggests that the outer limestone casing was not properly bonded to the underlying stepped core, leading to significant slippage and the eventual partial collapse and abandonment of the pyramid. There's no indication that it was ever used for a royal burial.
A groundbreaking attempt at a true pyramid that was ultimately deemed unsafe and never used. That must have been a significant setback for Sneferu. But the Meidum Pyramid complex still incorporated other features that would become standard in later royal burials, didn't it?
You're absolutely right. Even though the pyramid structure itself was flawed, the Meidum complex introduced several key architectural elements that were adopted and refined by subsequent pharaohs. It included a long covered causeway leading down to a valley temple constructed by Sneferu at the edge of the cultivation. While the precise function of these valley temples is still debated among Egyptologists, the prevailing theory, and the one supported by the lecture, is that they served as important sites for the initial stages of the pharaoh's mummification rituals and the reception of funerary processions arriving from the Nile.
A covered causeway for the solemn and sacred procession. That sounds like a significant development in the planning of royal funerary rites. And there was also a mortuary temple located adjacent to the pyramid itself.
Yes, situated immediately next to the base of the Meidum Pyramid was a mortuary temple. These temples played a crucial role in the post-burial cult of the pharaoh, serving as a place where priests would perform daily rituals and present offerings to the pharaoh's ka, ensuring his eternal sustenance and continued well-being in the afterlife. So, even with the structural issues of the pyramid itself, Sneferu was clearly establishing the essential components of a complete royal funerary complex.
And the Meidum Pyramid also featured a significant architectural innovation within the pyramid's interior structure itself, correct?
Absolutely. The Meidum Pyramid contains the earliest known example of an above-ground burial chamber located within the main body of a pyramid. Unlike Djoser, whose burial chamber was situated deep underground beneath his step pyramid, Sneferu intended to be interred inside the pyramid structure itself, more than 100 feet above the level of the surrounding desert.
Placing the pharaoh's burial chamber within the pyramid's mass, that must have presented entirely new and considerable engineering challenges, especially considering the immense weight of the stone above.
It certainly did. Roofing a large burial chamber situated deep within a pyramid composed of millions of pounds of stone was a formidable architectural problem. Sneferu's engineers devised an ingenious solution using what's known as a corbelled ceiling.
Ah, the corbelling.
This technique involves layering the stones in the walls of the chamber, with each successive layer projecting slightly inward, gradually reducing the span until it can be closed at the top with capstones. This method effectively distributes the immense weight of the pyramid away from a single point, creating a strong and stable roof for the burial chamber.
That's a truly ingenious structural solution, distributing the compressive forces rather than relying on massive lintels to bear the entire load. But despite these innovations, the Maiden Pyramid was ultimately abandoned. What archaeological clues led to that conclusion?
Besides the clear evidence of structural instability and partial collapse, and the absence of any indication of its use for burial, archaeologists discovered two uninscribed stelae located near the mortuary temple.
Uninscribed.
Yes. These large, round-topped stone slabs were clearly intended to bear important inscriptions, most likely including Sneferu's name, titles, and perhaps religious texts, but they were never carved. This strongly suggests that the complex was never fully completed or officially consecrated for its intended funerary purpose. Interestingly, the only reason we can be certain that the Maiden Pyramid was indeed Sneferu's is some later graffiti found within the mortuary temple, dating to the 18th dynasty around the time of the famous pharaoh Tutankhamun, where a visiting priest made a clear reference to coming to the temple of Sneferu.
So, failure number one in his pursuit of the perfect pyramid. But Sneferu was clearly not one to be easily discouraged, as he embarked on a second attempt at Djoser, resulting in the famously angled bent pyramid.
That's right. Sneferu's second pyramid, located at Djoser, is instantly recognizable due to its distinctive change in slope partway up its sides, hence its enduring name, the bent pyramid. This rather abrupt shift in the angle of its construction has puzzled historians and archaeologists for generations.
What was the primary cause of this unusual bend? Was it another unforeseen engineering issue that they had to adapt to mid-construction?
It appears there were likely two primary contributing factors that led to the change in the pyramid's angle. Firstly, the corners of the bent pyramid seem to have been constructed on a less stable foundation, possibly a combination of shifting sand and less solid bedrock. This instability caused the corners to experience inward movement and settling, resulting in significant cracking within the pyramid's internal structure.
Cracking, not good.
Not good at all. Secondly, the immense weight of the upper sections of the pyramid was causing the walls of the burial chambers and internal passageways to also crack and move inward. Remarkably, within the bent pyramid, massive cedar wood beams imported from Lebanon were discovered, used as internal supports to try and brace and hold apart these cracked walls. Imagine these substantial wooden beams employed within a massive stone structure in an attempt to prevent catastrophic collapse.
So it was facing major structural integrity issues. Why did they then decide to continue building it, albeit with this noticeable change in the angle of the upper section?
The decision to alter the construction angle, transitioning from a steeper incline for the lower section to a shallower one for the upper portion, was likely a pragmatic measure driven by necessity. By reducing the angle higher up, the builders could complete the pyramid more quickly and using significantly less stone, essentially an attempt to salvage a project that was facing serious structural challenges. However, despite this adaptation, it seems the bent pyramid was also ultimately abandoned as the primary burial site.
Abandoned again.
Seems so. Like the Maiden Pyramid, the bent pyramid complex included a valley temple and a causeway, but there's no definitive evidence it was ever used for Sneferu's interment. It even contains two separate burial chambers, adding to the mystery.
Two abandoned pyramids. Sneferu was certainly a determined individual to persevere after such significant setbacks. His third attempt, also located at Djoser, finally yielded the first large, true pyramid, the Red Pyramid.
Exactly. Sneferu's third pyramid, the Red Pyramid, also situated at Djoser, represents his ultimate triumph in achieving the ideal of a true, smooth-sided pyramid. It is the first large-scale pyramid built with consistently sloping sides from its base to its apex, and it served as his final and successful resting place. It gets its distinctive name from the reddish hue the local limestone takes on in the sunlight. Through the hard-won lessons learned from the structural issues encountered at the Maiden and Bit pyramids, Sneferu finally demonstrated to the ancient world how to construct a stable and enduring true pyramid.
So, an astonishing 3 pyramids attributed to Sneferu. That's an incredible testament to his ambition and the rapid advancements in engineering during his reign. But his legacy extends beyond just these monumental structures. He also significantly elevated Egypt's standing as a major international power, didn't he?
Absolutely. Sneferu's ambitions were not confined to the geographical boundaries of Egypt. As we noted with the bent pyramid requiring substantial cedar wood for internal support, Egypt itself was relatively resource poor when it came to large timber. Consequently, Sneferu organized large-scale, well-planned trading expeditions to the distant lands of Lebanon to acquire the much-needed high-quality cedar wood. This timber was essential for a variety of purposes, including shipbuilding, the construction of sturdy temple doors, and the crafting of tall flagpoles.
But these weren't just minor trading excursions, they were significant international undertakings.
Precisely. These were substantial logistical operations requiring considerable organization and resources. It's important to remember that while the ancient Egyptians were masters of navigating the Nile River, relying on its consistent south-to-north current and the prevailing north-to-south winds for relatively easy travel within their own borders, they were not particularly skilled or inclined towards lengthy sea voyages on the open Mediterranean, which they referred to somewhat cautiously as the Great Green Eye, viewing extended overseas travel as a rather bold and even somewhat perilous undertaking.
The Great Green Eye. I like that.
Therefore, Sneferu's organized ventures to Lebanon represent a significant step in establishing Egypt's reach and influence beyond its immediate territories.
And he also directed expeditions in a completely different direction eastward, towards the Sinai Peninsula.
Yes, Sneferu also strategically dispatched mining expeditions to the Sinai Peninsula. The primary objective of these ventures was to acquire turquoise, that highly prized and vibrantly blue semi-precious stone that was highly valued for crafting exquisite jewelry and decorative inlays, and importantly, was not found within the geological confines of Egypt itself.
But the Sinai was considered foreign and potentially hostile territory, wasn't it?
Indeed, the Sinai was viewed as barbarian territory, inhabited by nomadic groups, necessitating a significant military presence to secure and protect the Egyptian mining operations. Along the routes through the Sinai, inscriptions bearing Sneferu's name have been discovered, often depicting him in the traditional pharaonic smiting pose, wielding a mace and triumphantly striking down his enemies, accompanied by inscriptions proudly proclaiming, "Sneferu, smiter of barbarians." This clearly underscores the military aspect of these resource acquisition expeditions.
Turquoise mining in the harsh environment of the Sinai sounds like it would have been an incredibly arduous undertaking.
It was undoubtedly a demanding and challenging endeavor. The conditions within the turquoise mines were incredibly harsh, characterized by oppressive heat and confined, often dangerous working spaces. Interestingly, atop the Sinai Mountains, Sneferu established a temple dedicated to Hathor, the ancient Egyptian goddess strongly associated with turquoise and frequently depicted with bovine features. She was revered in this context as Our Lady of Turquoise and served as the patron deity and protector of the miners.
A temple for the miners.
Yes. The local Bedouin population today still refer to this ancient site as Serabit el-Qadim. Famously, the pioneering Egyptologist Flinders Petrie also extensively excavated this temple and, in a rather curious episode, buried a small sphinx he unearthed there, as he lacked the means to safely transport it down the treacherous mountain paths, and its precise burial location has sadly been lost to modern rediscovery.
A buried sphinx high in the Sinai Mountains. Another intriguing mystery awaiting potential rediscovery. And Sneferu's international engagements also had a noticeable impact on the development of Egyptian art, didn't they?
Absolutely. Sneferu's reign witnessed significant advancements and a flourishing of innovation in Egyptian artistic expression. The newfound and more reliable access to vibrant turquoise from the Sinai directly spurred the creation of increasingly elaborate and beautiful jewelry, including intricate inlays, often crafted in the delicate shapes of butterflies. Furthermore, his reign saw the production of remarkably lifelike, almost life-size stone statues of his royal children. These sculptures are now considered true masterpieces of early Egyptian art, establishing a new benchmark for realism and technical skill that would influence subsequent generations of Egyptian artists and sculptors.
We heard about some of these exceptional statues, the famous depictions of Rahotep, who was a high-ranking priest of Memphis, and also Sneferu's son and his wife Nofret, renowned for their incredibly realistic inlaid rock crystal eyes.
Yes, the striking seated statues of Rahotep and Nofret are truly remarkable for their exceptional level of realism, their remarkably well-preserved, vibrant painted surfaces, and particularly for their inlaid eyes crafted from polished rock crystal, which impart an almost startlingly lifelike gaze.
The eyes follow you.
Exactly. The meticulous detail in the depiction of Nofret's elaborate wig, even showing strands of her natural hair peeking out at her forehead, is also a testament to the extraordinary artistic skill of the period. Statues of other prominent sons, such as Himinunu, who served as a key architect and vizier under later pharaohs, are often depicted as being quite stout, a visual representation of prosperity, high social standing, and the abundance associated with their privileged status in Egyptian society.
So Sneferu was far more than just a powerful ruler and an ambitious builder. He was also a significant patron of the arts, fostering innovation and setting a new standard for artistic achievement. And surprisingly, the lecture also provided a brief anecdote that offered a more personal glimpse into his character, suggesting he might have been surprisingly approachable.
That's right. An entertaining anecdote preserved in the Papyrus Westcar, a later collection of ancient Egyptian magical tales, offers a more intimate glimpse into Sneferu's personality. The story recounts a time when Sneferu was feeling rather bored, and his court advisors suggested a leisurely boat ride on the Nile to lift his spirits, with the beautiful ladies of the court adorned in revealing fishnet dresses, perhaps one of the earliest recorded instances of the allure of fishnet attire.
Right.
During this seemingly lighthearted outing, one of the women, who was wearing a prized turquoise fish amulet, a fashionable accessory at the time, given Sneferu's Sinai expeditions, accidentally dropped it into the river.
Oh no. What was Sneferu's reaction to this minor mishap? Did he simply dismiss it and offer a replacement?
Quite the contrary. When the young woman began to weep over her lost amulet, Sneferu, despite his immense power and status as pharaoh, immediately ordered the royal boat to be stopped and personally inquired about the cause of her distress. Upon learning about the lost turquoise amulet, he graciously offered to replace it with another, perhaps even a finer one. However, the young woman politely but firmly insisted on the return of her original and presumably personally cherished turquoise fish amulet. This detail suggests a degree of approachability that a member of the court felt comfortable enough to decline the pharaoh's generous offer and express her specific desire.
That definitely paints a different picture than the typically stern and remote image we often associate with pharaohs. So what did Sneferu do to recover her treasured amulet?
To fulfill her wish, the tale recounts that Sneferu then summoned a skilled magician who, through the use of powerful magic, miraculously parted the waters in the Nile, allowing the lost turquoise amulet to be easily retrieved from the riverbed. While this element of the story is undoubtedly a piece of entertaining fiction intended to highlight the pharaoh's power and perhaps his benevolence, the underlying narrative of his initial concern for a court lady's distress and his willingness to intervene does offer a more humanizing perspective on Sneferu's character.
So a ruler who was both immensely powerful and, at least according to this anecdote, surprisingly considerate. And the lecture consistently emphasized his remarkable determination, particularly in his relentless pursuit of perfecting pyramid construction.
Absolutely. The story of Sneferu is a compelling narrative of remarkable persistence in the face of significant challenges. Despite the structural failures and ultimate abandonment of both the Matum and bent pyramids, he did not abandon his ambitious vision. Even in the later years of his reign, he embarked on the construction of a third and ultimately successful pyramid, the magnificent Red Pyramid. This unwavering determination to learn from setbacks and continue striving for his architectural goals is a key characteristic of his reign and a significant reason why the lecturer clearly holds him in such high regard.
So Sneferu's lasting legacy is indeed multifaceted. Groundbreaking innovations in pyramid building, the establishment of Egypt as a significant international power, the setting of new artistic standards, and even a hint of personal approachability. But perhaps his most enduring legacy of all is the one he ultimately passed on to his son.
You've highlighted a truly crucial point. While Sneferu's own achievements were monumental, perhaps his most profound and far-reaching legacy was his son, Khufu, also widely known by his Greek name, Cheops, who, of course, go on to commission the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza, the most colossal pyramid ever built.
The big one.
Sneferu's tireless experimentation and the advancements made during his reign laid the essential groundwork, both in terms of accumulated engineering know-how and the vast resources available to the increasingly powerful Egyptian state that made such an unprecedented undertaking by his successor ultimately possible.
And we were given a fascinating little teaser about Khufu also commissioning the construction of a large boat to be placed next to his awe-inspiring pyramid, a topic we absolutely must delve into in a future deep dive.
Indeed. The remarkable discovery of Khufu's solar barge and its intricate symbolism and purpose is a captivating topic in itself and provides further invaluable insights into the complex religious beliefs and funerary practices of the Old Kingdom.
Well, that brings us to the end of our incredibly insightful deep dive into the fascinating and formative Old Kingdom of ancient Egypt. We've traced its origins from unification, marveled at the astonishing ingenuity and perseverance of its builders, and even caught a glimpse of the surprisingly human side of one of its most influential pharaohs.
Who could have imagined that the seemingly simple desire for a more permanent and secure burial would ultimately lead to the creation of the iconic pyramids that continue to inspire awe and wonder millennia later. Or that a fleeting moment of royal boredom might inadvertently offer us a unique window into the social dynamics of the time.
We sincerely hope this detailed exploration has sparked your curiosity and provided you with some surprising aha moments, illuminating the foundations upon which so much of ancient Egyptian civilization was built. There is, of course, a wealth of knowledge still to be uncovered in the long and rich history of ancient Egypt, and we wholeheartedly encourage you to delve further into the sources and explore the many fascinating questions that may have risen during our discussion today.
Thank you for joining us once again on Beyond the Known. If you enjoy this deep dive into the world of pharaohs, pyramids, and ancient mysteries, please take a moment to like, follow, and subscribe to our show for more journeys into the depths of history and knowledge.